Kartikeya Talreja, take two. Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast.
Thank you so much, Shoshana and Adam. Thank you so much for uh, having me as part of your podcast. And it's such a delight meeting the both of you. And it's such a wonderful thing knowing your personal journey. It's very inspiring, and it's such a positive vibe to it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. That means a lot. And we're grateful that you're here with us. We know that you took a trip over to India right before COVID hit, which got you, you didn't have your return ticket back in time. So you've been there for the last 7 months. So we're grateful with this time difference and with this internet that we're able to communicate with you and bring your wealth and knowledge from your business in California all the way to our listeners, and we would like to know what you're grateful for today.
Shoshana and Adam, nothing gives me more joy than to see people heal. We live in the world of social media. We are able to share so much with so many people, and you see, all of us have so much to contribute. And if whether people know us or we know them one on one, or whether they just are part of the way you run podcasts. I have my own social media channels. So as long as people are benefiting from it and healing it, and even if one person, whatever information that we have, even if it helps one person heal, there is no greater joy than that.
There really isn't. And of course, the computer crashed 5 minutes into our podcast. So we have had this small mini discussion already. And what I had said to you for your moment of gratitude is that when I get messages from my clients that their lab tests are coming back better, or their doctors have done an ultrasound and the ligament isn't showing any damage anymore, and they are having some kind of amazing healing within their body, that message, when they send it to me or when I speak to them again, is so healing for me and healing for my soul. And it's wonderful work. We have ups and downs because we go through the tragedies and the victories of our clients when they come to us, but those messages are so healing for us as well.
I completely relate and empathize with you. I relate to you completely. Absolutely.
I think it's a time right now where we all need to heal in so many different ways, and the conversation that we're going to have today is going to surround itself with healing. So before we get into the Ayurveda and understanding of that terminology and get deeper into it, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you found a plant-based lifestyle and how you started to use it to heal yourself.
Absolutely. See, I'm 43. I turned vegetarian in the year, maybe that's about 28 years ago. I had gone for a holiday and I caught a fish. And I'm so glad that I was able to remove the fish from the hook and put it back inside the water. And looking at the fish struggle really melted my being. And I decided on that day that I will stop eating meat or chicken or eggs from that day. So after that, I never ate any meat. But I did continue with milk. And a few years ago, because see, there's so much information out there on the horrors, if I may say, and all the tragedies that we are facing and the earth is experiencing because of animal farming and our usage of animal products and its impact on our health and planet, that I decided to do a lot more research on top of what I already knew. And I just kind of realized that it's the quality of whatever we eat at this moment in time should be the best at what we can get. And no matter how hard you try, animal farming or animal products at this moment in time are very, very toxic. And the more you intake, the more there is an intake of those products, the more it'll start affecting your system. And the root cause of so much misery as far as human health goes, and even planet health, but so much of human health goes, is all goes back mostly to processed food and animal products. So from that day, a few years ago, I decided to turn vegan, and I also decided to transit to a whole plant-based diet. And I did so. I'm 43. I have more energy today than I had at 23 or 24. So when I experienced the transition myself, I felt that, you know what, this is it. that I should be able to like once a person experiences it, the level of confidence while sharing the same knowledge with others is manifold, and I wanted to go through the journey myself. And it's and being vegetarian and transiting to a whole plant-based diet is much easier, and it wasn't so difficult for me, and I became lactose intolerant by default anyway. And then I made the transit, and I'm just so glad that I made the transit. I mean, as far as health goes, I'm quite on top of the world.
And I think a lot of people are lactose intolerant, and when they are enlightened to notice that that is a request for them to give up all dairy products instead of eat dairy products that have the lactose taken out from it, I think that's when their healing journeys really begin. So yeah, so that's a really good point out there that I wanted to bring up to the listeners, because we haven't talked about in a while, is if you are lactose intolerant, don't just go back to the animal products or those dairy products that don't have the lactose in it. It's been taken out, because it's a big sign for you that you have a lot of healing to do that you can do with so many other foods. And Ayurveda in a nutshell is really about healing. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about what it is and break it down into those terms that everyone can understand?
Of course, of course. You see, if you just take the term Ayurveda, Ayurveda comes from the Sanskrit language, and it's a combination of two words. One is Ayu, and the second is Veda. Ayu actually means life. It may also translate as longevity, and Veda means knowledge. So it's essentially the knowledge of life or the knowledge of longevity. Okay? So Ayurveda is one of the oldest traditional methods of natural healing. It throughout human history, whether you've been in Alaska or an Inuit in Canada or anywhere, people have been practicing Ayurveda. Ayurveda is nothing but aligning yourself to live by nature's rhythms and seasons, by your own constitution, in order to arrive or achieve optimal health and to keep disease away. So that's the goal and objective of Ayurveda. Ayurveda understands, or rather helps us understand, that nature works through elements. Nature works through seasons and many other ways. And we are nature. We are not different from nature. We are nature. So because we are nature, we have to align ourselves with nature. As long as you're doing that, optimal health will always remain with you. So I want to also link it to a plant-based diet and plant-based lifestyle. A lot of people think, and they are correct, a lot of people think that Ayurveda has a lot of love for milk. Ayurveda has a lot of reverence for ghee. That is true. But the people who actually compiled the Ayurvedic texts thousands of years ago, their quality of milk and ghee is very, very different from what we eat today. They respected milk. They had a reverence for ghee. Today, the milk that we get is toxic. It's not nectar. It's toxic. It is the root cause of so much misery. It's not funny. Life has changed. So we also need to adapt for our own survival. So I always propagate a whole plant-based therapy or nutrition using the Ayurvedic principles. So I also want to share something with you. I told you about throughout our history, human species has been living by Ayurveda like the animals have been living by nature's rhythms and seasons. So yes, people in India, they wrote about the principles, how it works, how the elements work, they studied it. But if I tell you about how people have been using Ayurveda, they've been using Ayurveda for all of history. Like if you're feeling cold, naturally you are more inclined to taking warm soups. I know, Adam, you love soups in a cup.
In a mug.
So
you did your homework.
Absolutely. So naturally, by common sense and common wisdom, if you're feeling cold in Toronto in this weather, that's fall, you are naturally inclined to take warming foods. You're not inclined towards ice cream. If you're inclined towards ice cream this time, that Ayurveda identifies as an abnormal craving. So you need help. Everybody needs help. right? So during the cold climate, during summers, you're naturally inclined to eating cucumbers because we know cucumbers are cooling in nature, right? So, so it's about cultural wisdom. It is about common sense. And that's how human beings have survived.
So there's a whole bunch of things that you just talked about, and I'd like to start to pull them apart. And I hope that I remember everything that I'd like to pull apart. But you talked about constitutions. So
Yes.
I believe that there's 4 of them. Am I correct?
3.
Okay. I'm
3.
corrected. There's 3 of them.
That's
So
okay.
let's go
That's
through
okay.
those.
Yes. The Ayurveda helps us understand elements, right? So they understand that, they shared that there are 5 elements: earth, water, fire, ether, air. And many a times, these 2 elements, they converge and they synergize, right? So I'll make things very, very simple. So they've identified constitutions or bioenergy, which they call dosha. Now, dosha, the actual translation of dosha is actually fault. So you are born with faults. The whole game of Ayurveda is making sure that the faults are always balanced. And the moment those doshas are in balance and harmony with nature, you will always be close to or will experience a state of optimal health. So the 3 doshas are vata, that's a combination of ether and air; kapha, that is earth and water; and pitta, that is fire and water. So I know it can get a little overwhelming because elements, and it's a very big subject. But to make it more simpler, it's essentially air, water, and fire. So it's the play of these elements with the help of which the universe works, with the help of which creation works, right? So there's a lot more. I identified 20 attributes, like, it's like the really base of things: that soft, hard, light, heavy, and so on and so forth. But it's so each of us has a constitution with which we are born, and a current and may have a current state of imbalance, right? So if you are if you are born with the kapha constitution or the water constitution, you have a tendency of excess. So usually, if it you know so typically you might be slightly larger, you'll be more prone to gaining weight. You will be, if you don't exercise enough, you'll be more prone to being heavy. Your digestion will be sluggish because the earth and the water elements are heavy in nature. If you are part of the pitta or the fire constitution, you will have a lot of leadership. You'll have a lot of leadership qualities. You may be fiery. You'll have a lot of foresight. You cannot be a politician or a leader or a CEO or like a great CEO of a company and a large corporation till you don't have a good fire element inside you. Then the third is vata, or the air and ether element. So people who have a dominant vata constitution or the vata dosha, those guys tend to be skinny. They tend to be forgetful. They tend to have dry skin. They tend to have drier internals. So a lot of time people like of the air or and ether constitution, the vata constitution, the kind of health issues that they have are, they have issues with dry constipation, a lot of gas and bloating, and so on and so forth. So the way Ayurveda understands is that we understand what your constitution is, or rather, one can, using the wisdom of Ayurveda, understand that this is my constitution, and you know that this is your fault, or this is where your imbalances may lie, and you keep harmony with nature by aligning to nature after knowing what your constitution is, to keep yourself in a state of optimal health.
So there was a lot there, and you mentioned some of the qualities of some of those different constitutions. And of course, people will identify more with one that you said, but still find overlap in other
Yes.
ones. And
Yes.
I've taken many online quizzes to let me know
Yes.
which my constitution
Yes.
is. And no matter where I've been in my health journey, I've probably taken them about 3 or 4 times over the last 10 years, I'd say. And even though some of the ways that I'm feeling or acting, I'm always a pitta. I always come back to pitta. But you also talk about imbalance. So, if I'm supposed to be fiery and hot, but I'm constantly cold and need to wear 2 pairs of socks, people are saying, okay, I've got this fiery energy, but my body's cold. So what's happening with the imbalance there?
See, I'm very happy you are discussing this topic with me. Some people have a single constitution that is dominant. Most people have two constitutions that are dominant. One may be more dominating than the other. Rarely there are people who have all three doshas equally dominant. Right, so there's a huge permutation and combination that happens because you see, all of us have very unique constitutions. So you, in your case, even if you may have identified that you are a fire constitution or the pitta constitution, maybe having the current your basic constitution as pitta, but your current state of imbalance can be the air element. Right? So if you have the air element or even the water element, you have a tendency of feeling cold. Your skin will tend to get dry, right? Um, so it all depends upon what your current state is. Right now, people who also have, say, if your current state of imbalance is the air, right? As I said, you'll have issues with, not you, people will have issues with dry skin. They can get a little scattered. In this weather, in Toronto and, at least the northern part of the world, it is the fall season. Right, so the fall season is also a very, very air and ether or a vata dominant season. Look at the winds today. Vata, by its core nature, is cold. It is, it is cold, it is light, it is dry. So this is the season. It is cold, it is light, it is dry. So even people feel an excess of vata during this time because it is the season of vata. No doubt you are feeling cold. No doubt, despite having a fire constitution, you may be facing an imbalance of the air element, and therefore you are feeling cold, and you need 2 socks or maybe more, woolen, not woolen, but acrylic socks or warm socks just to keep you warm. So perhaps it could be a possibility. It could also be a possibility that you might be a major pitta or a major fire and a minor air. That could also be a possibility. So once a person sees all that, accordingly, you keep balancing the air.
So that's very interesting, which kind of makes me think, if this has been around for 5,000 years, it clearly wasn't created with North America in mind, right? Because North America wasn't existing then, or it was existing, sorry, but there wasn't population here. So how does it translate when you take it from India to Europe or to Canada or to United States or various parts of United States? Is there some kind of mathematical equation that needs to tweak things, or does it exist throughout because the foods that are created here are different and all of that?
I am absolutely delighted that you've removed this point. I've been doing a lot of research on this. And the answer to this is that you see the elements are the same everywhere. The elements are the same on the moon. The elements are the same over here, except that, yes, you may argue that on the moon there's no water, but that's a different story. But
I heard they may have found water a few weeks ago.
Correct. So on Earth, right, everything by Ayurvedic theory or even ancient theory of the Greeks, everything has been created because of the elements, right? So elements have not changed. In North America, it may be a lot more colder. In certain parts of India, it may be warm throughout. but the elements are the same. So a person uses the wisdom of Ayurveda based on its principles of understanding how the elements work. Right? See, by the way, North India can be very, very cold. We have the Himalayas too. Right? So we have similar seasons in certain parts of India, like Europe. But I mean, but yes, it is like a warmer country. So the principles of aligning yourself with nature are the same everywhere. The only difference is that in classical texts of India, they identify 6 seasons. The Chinese ancient texts identify 5 seasons, and the Europeans and the North Americans identify 4 seasons. Right? But the principles of how nature works is and will always remain the same. Climate change will make a difference, but things will, remain the same. So coming back to, if I speak to you about summer is dominated by the fire element, right? So naturally, it's if you have the fire element in excess, not you in the sense in nature, it'll be a lot more hotter, right? So there at that time you do cooling activities instead of we suggest at that time it is not wise to run in the afternoon at 12 noon under the hot sun if it is the summertime. You rather do cooling activities like swimming, right? So in the fall you do mild exercises, you do things that are gentle, because any vigorous exercise may also affect or imbalance or create an imbalance in the fire in the air element. So you keep living by the seasons. The principles of nature do not change. You have different foods. Yes, India has different foods, but Ayurveda identifies that each food has a certain energetics to it, right? So the foods can be warming, like turmeric is warming, ginger is considered to be a warm food, cucumbers are cold, right? Turmeric powder is dry, right? And if you put coriander, like cilantro, in your mouth, it has a slightly oily texture to it. So these are energetics of food. Fresh cilantro will be cooling. Coriander seed, cilantro seed is warming. I mean, it's a lot. I don't want to overwhelm you, but all the listeners, but all I'm trying to tell you is that that's how Ayurveda identifies that if in the summer you eat cooling foods, in the winter you eat warming foods. Nature has given correct foods at the correct time. At this time, it's a great time during the fall to eat root vegetables like yams, sweet potatoes, winter squashes, because they grow now. And they are the superfood for this weather.
So this is pretty fascinating. And I think that I've done some research for myself and found that I also am dominant in the Pitta dosha. And what I think people want to know is, once they've identified their dosha, how do they then use Ayurvedic medicine or Ayurveda to help themselves heal from whatever they might be going through at this time?
The first thing that I recommend to do, and you'll be very happy listening to this, is transit to a plant-based diet, please. That is my first prerequisite, that I'll help you transit. Let us make a transit first. Point number 1. Point number 2 is, you see, one can study about it. One can, consult people like me or the Ayurvedic people who can help them transit, or to help them give education and information of relevant content that can help them heal. All of us, even if you're talking about eating a plant-based diet and a plant-based lifestyle, it's a huge subject, right? So coming back to, if I give a specific answer to your question, so Ayurveda believes that the Pitta people, like the people with the dominant fire, right, they have a lot of positives, right? So as I shared the positives with you, they can be superb leaders. Their ability to focus is extraordinary, right? If you focus on something that this is what you want to achieve, you people tend to get super goal oriented. But Pitta people are also have a lot of obsession towards that everything should be perfect, right? Their obsession towards perfection can be very obsessive to the extent that, you know what, they tend to go many extra miles to achieve their goal quick. Now, if they do that, it's a great thing for their career, but it should not burn them out. You see, investment into one's own health and well-being is very, very important, right? So I always tell my Pitta clients that make sure that you have spent enough time to rest and recuperate and not run so much behind perfection. It'll come, but technically perfection is a myth. They can try really hard, but not everything will go the way they want it to be. So they have to be flexible. They have to relax. They have to meditate. They have to learn how to breathe, and they have to learn how to cool down. You see, there's a difference between reducing your, I don't tell them to reduce their speed, but I definitely tell them to calm down, right? Because they tend to get pretty heaty also, and that affects their health, stress. Then they start getting issues like stomach ulcers, and they start getting, these are all, and they also tend to eat very, very spicy food that only adds to a lot of their issues just in case things are imbalanced. So this is how I help people. Like, this is what Ayurveda recommends more than what I say helps people.
So that's my question. If you figured out your constitution and you have a Pitta who's very fiery, very hot, does that mean that eating something like turmeric is going to help them, or is it going to hinder them? Or only if they're having imbalance do they then eat it so that they can get back into balance?
Yes, that's a very good question. See, turmeric by its very nature is heaty. Turmeric in small quantities and in moderation. Now, let me tell you what moderation is. Let me tell you that it's important. I wouldn't dare to take more than 1/8 of a teaspoon of turmeric in a glass of warm water if ever I need to take turmeric, right? A lot of people in America, once they see turmeric, they might even take a tablespoon of it. Now that is, for us, it is an outrageously large quantity, right? So, golden milk is a very, very respected and a very well-known, drink at this moment in time. But turmeric is a blessing, but in moderation. If you take an excess of it, turmeric will heat up your system. It'll start giving you skin inflammation. It'll start giving you rashes, right? So Indian people, it is rare to see most of Indian food without turmeric, but not one. We don't add 1 tablespoon. So everything in moderation is good. Apart from red chilies or green chilies, green chilies and red chilies, for the Pitta, overall, they irritate the intestines, or they tend to irritate the intestines. So I don't have a problem with turmeric, but the energetics of red chilies and green chilies, it's far more pungent. Even if you taste them, it's like really spicy and very pungent. So I would advise the Pitta people to stop red or green chilies first, or even jalapeno peppers. That's like really spicy. That's like pungent.
I just bought you some yesterday.
Tell them that yes.
I like them.
He loves them. He'll go through like a jar a month.
Yeah. Now, in this month, in moderation, it's fine because it's getting colder. But in the summer, it's like a serious no-no. I do not doubt the nutritional benefits of it. It has green chilies, has a lot of vitamin C. I don't doubt that. But ultimately, whether are you able to digest it? Number one. What does it do to your system? Number two. So these are all very, very important questions that one must consider. I hope I've answered your question of turmeric and related it to everything.
So what I understand is moderation, use it slowly, but I think it really comes back to paying attention to your body and how you're reacting to certain foods. And if somebody starts taking an anti-inflammatory capsule because they've hurt their finger in a basketball game, that they then need to see what the other effects are of taking that anti-inflammatory capsule are, or the turmeric or what have you in other parts of the body. So let's give the listeners some action that they can take, and let's talk about some of the top 3 or 4 foods that each constitution. I don't want to be Pitta heavy just because we're Pitta. I want to give everybody an opportunity to start to think about the 2 to 3 foods that they should be including, and then the 2 to 3 foods that really should be taken in moderation for each of these constitutions.
Okay. Now, as far as we will start off with the kapha dosha, or the earth, and the people where in whom the elements of water and air, water and earth are dominant. Now, these are people who love food. They love heavy food, and they love heavy food. They love fatty food. So the first thing that I tell them is a serious no is no dairy, please. Right? So that's the first thing that I tell them. You see, if they can, they should eat lighter foods. Right? Quinoa is brilliant. Brown rice in moderation is brilliant. And also there's something that I tell them which is very important to me and very important for good health overall. I tell them, for all the doshas, I tell them to stay away, as far away from processed food as possible. So I first tell them, please avoid and eliminate white rice. If you have a liking for rice, you can take wild rice, you can take basmati rice, you can take brown rice, and avoid white rice, right? Because of, nutrition is very, very important. If a person takes wholesome, whole food, and even whole grain, he or she will be surprised at the level of how satiated he or she feels after eating whole foods, right? So I always tell them to keep away from, for all the doshas, I also tell them to keep away from sugar, right? So, and to eat as many whole foods as possible. As far as the kapha dosha goes, I first tell them that try and eat lighter foods, right? Initially, these guys, they struggle a little bit, right? But once they experience the joy of feeling slightly lighter than they currently are, their energy levels go up, their minds become sharper, and they just feel much more energetic than they previously were. Now, the heavy foods, as I told you, I'm like completely against cheese, right? So and the heavy foods are, say, avocados are a heavy food, right? So I tell these guys to take avocados in moderation. I also tell them to avoid sweets completely, right? So no sugar whatsoever, no brown sugar whatsoever. And kapha people are supposed to take lighter food. Quinoa is a good grain for them. Amaranth is a great grain for them. Brown rice is good. It's slightly on the heavier side, but these people also need to feel satiated. So I tell them, you eat brown rice, or at least during the time of transit, they'll just feel more fuller, right? So they need to eat less fatty food. They need to eat lighter foods. As I told you, amaranth is a great grain. Sorghum is a superb whole grain. So this is what I would advise the kapha people to eat. Lighter foods, always lighter foods. For the pitta people, oh, by the way, for the kapha people, the bitter taste, green vegetables that have bitter taste, like kale, is a superb, it's a superfood for the kapha people. A lot of veggies, a lot of soups are absolutely brilliant. For the pitta people, the most important thing that I tell them to do is, number one, avoid sour foods, avoid fermented foods like kombucha, and avoid pungent foods, right? Usually pitta people have a good digestive system, right? Because pitta and digestion have a very close relationship with each other, because there's a concept of the digestive fire that controls digestion, and almost the central intelligence of every cell in the body is controlled by that, by the concept of the fire in the body. And pitta is also fire. So these are two related, they are cousins. They are related to each other because both of them are part of the fire element. And to these people, to the pitta people, coming back to the pitta people, I tell them to stop or reduce taking pungent foods, like avoid jalapeno peppers, avoid green chilies, avoid red chilies, avoid fermented foods, avoid sour foods, except lime is absolutely fine for them, right? But sour food, like say a lot of like kombucha and a lot of fermented foods can also be sour. To them, I also tell them to avoid alcohol because alcohol is fermented food. Alcohol, according to Ayurveda, is in smaller quantities is good and it's okay during the winters. Definitely not during the summers because it's ultimately its energetics it's heaty. It heats up the system. And for the Vata people, I tell them to eat fatty foods. For the Vata people, avocados are beautiful. Anything that's heavy. Heaviness does not mean I do not tell them, or Ayurveda does not tell them to overeat, right? But they need to take fatty foods, like even seeds, like sesame seeds, dry fruit, right? But provided they are soaked, and essentially heavy foods, oily foods, as I told you, sesame seeds. If you can manage to get coconut is a blessing for Vata people. Coconut is also a blessing for Pitta people because of its cooling nature, right? And coconut is beautiful for Vata, especially dry coconut because it is oily in nature. I do know that in Canada, some foods may not be available for you, but in today's day and age, if not that, then at least you can use desiccated coconut, which is surely available in Whole Foods and all the organic foods that are there in Canada. Vata people should also eat warming foods, right? They can have their teas, they can have turmeric in moderation. Ginger is a beautiful, beautiful root for Vata people. Fresh ginger is also good for Pitta and Kapha, all three of them. The Pitta guys, if you eat ginger in excess, then you'll feel the sensation of heat, which is not highly recommended, right? For the Kapha people and for the Vata people, because ginger is heaty. Fresh ginger is okay, but in excess, it can get heaty.
There's so much. There's so much to this.
Oh my God, we can go on. We can go on forever. So when you work with a client, you give them all these guidelines. Do you give them recipes as well, or do you give them the guidelines?
Yeah, first I make them fill a form so that I understand what their constitution is, right? Then I even teach them how to cook, and I also give them guidelines. For example, oats, right? Oats are a wonderful, beautiful food, but I always tell them eat foods that are closest to nature, right? So the closest is actually oat groats. But then I tell them to eat steel-cut gluten-free oats. And once you buy it, then I tell them to soak it overnight for at least 12 hours. Because once you soak any food, the water seeps inside and it becomes easier to cook, easier to digest. And in Ayurveda, the Ayurvedic wisdom believes that it's not only what you eat, it is what you can digest is what matters.
And what you're absorbing from your food is what I talk about all the time, because there's that big quote now, like, you are what you eat, and if you eat well, then you should be healthy. But are your cells healthy? Has your body been healthy for the last 10, 15, 20 years? And what kind of reversal do you need to do before your body is then able to start digesting and taking in your food, which is a really, really great point that you make. I have a question about children. Children's personalities are sometimes extremely strong, but not completely developed and not completely what they're going to be now. They might be disorganized and they just want to play their computer games all day, and they might be an amazing leader, but you might not recognize that in them yet because they're not quite there. So how do you figure out the dosha of a child, or the constitution and dosha? That's the same word? Yes. So how do you figure out the dosha of a child so that you're feeding them so that they can thrive as well as possible without quite understanding who they really, really are overall in this world yet?
I have a grin on my face and you realize why. The moment a little child is born, if it's a heavy baby, he's Kapha. If it's a medium-sized kid, he's Pitta. If it's a small child, he's Vata. That's one way of understanding. The second way is, if a child has leadership qualities, right? So perhaps the Pitta dosha, he's a Pitta child. But the more a person exposes himself or herself to gadgets, the more there is an aggravation and imbalance of the air element that happens inside the system.
Interesting.
That's so interesting.
The person, the child, even if he's 6 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, he is pitta, or he has a dominant fire element. But if he is exposing himself to screen time for 6 hours a day, to to television 6 hours a day, gadgets, a combination, anything that stimulates you will aggravate or increase the air element. Now, the moment the air element starts increasing, children will experience, number one, lack of concentration. Number two, dry skin. Number three, moodiness. Number four, he will start off with something. Maybe he or she may experience, the child will experience an inability to complete that task. He will need stimulation all the time. So that is, again, either that's a air or a vata imbalance. See, these are little things that one can see in all of us. Life has changed. Life is not, it's not the same. The way when we were children, life was so different. Today, kids are of the modern age. So you can identify what their dosha is, right? When my child was born, he gave such a loud cry. I was like, oh, gosh, that's like a pitta baby. And he is pitta. So it completely depends on how children are being brought up today, and then how much they crave stimulation because of gadgets. Things are very different today. When in the 1970s, scenes on television, even for kids shows, were longer. Today the editing is so fast.
Kartikeya, I think this is such an interesting topic, and there's so much more that we could have a conversation about when it comes to Ayurveda and lifestyle and all these things that we're mentioning right now. And maybe we can have you back on the show to talk again about another topic. Really appreciate you coming on the show to share with us. There's so much more to dive into. If people that are listening want to learn more about you or learn more about Ayurveda, where would you like them to go to connect with you?
Yes. See, they can either visit my website, that is www.yogaofeating.org, or they can connect with me on Facebook or Instagram with the handle @yogaofeating. So I do put up a lot of blogs and posts and
videos.
Oh yes, some videos. Absolutely.
Lots of good videos as well. And we're going to link to all of that in the show notes at planttrainers.com. Kartikeya, we are so happy and so grateful that you shared your wisdom, that you shared your ideas. I think everybody's now analyzing their children. And we're just so grateful that you were here with us today.
I am actually more grateful, Adam and Shoshana, for allowing me or giving me an opportunity to connect with you, and through you to everybody who will listen to this podcast. And I hope that everybody stays in joy and heals. We all need it, and I just express gratitude. Thank you so much.
Thank you.